They shot down Captain Victoria Kane's Black Hawk with an RPG, expecting no survivors. But when she crawled out of the wreckage with a broken leg and pure rage, the enemy squad that celebrated her death was about to learn why you never count out a wounded pilot. Meet Captain Victoria Kane, 29 years old, with ice-blue eyes that could track targets through the worst weather conditions, platinum blonde hair that she kept in a tight military bun, and hands that could make a Black Hawk helicopter dance through missile fire like a mechanical angel. She stood 5 feet 8 inches tall, carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never met a challenge she couldn't overcome, and had logged more combat flight hours than most pilots twice her age. But more importantly, Victoria Kane was the kind of person who never forgot a face, never forgave a betrayal, and never left a debt unpaid. She'd been flying missions over the mountains of Afghanistan for 18 months, earning a reputation as one of the most skilled helicopter pilots in the theater. Her call sign was Phoenix, not because she rose from ashes, but because she had a habit of appearing exactly when and where the enemy least expected her, like a mythical bird of prey diving out of the sun. On this particular Thursday morning in November, Victoria was piloting her Black Hawk on what should have been a routine resupply mission to Forward Operating Base Alpha, a remote outpost nestled in a valley between two mountain ranges. She was carrying medical supplies, ammunition, and 3 passengers, Lieutenant James Parker, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, and Corporal Jenny Williams. The weather was clear, the route was familiar, and intelligence reports suggested no enemy activity in the area. Intelligence was wrong. At 0847 hours, flying at 500 feet through a narrow canyon, Victoria's threat warning system began screaming. Multiple missile locks, ground-based firing solutions calculated and ready to launch. "Phoenix, we've got company!" Lieutenant Parker shouted from the cabin. "I see muzzle flashes on the ridge." Victoria immediately threw the Black Hawk into evasive maneuvers, dropping altitude and changing course to break the missile locks. But the enemy had positioned themselves perfectly, multiple teams with overlapping fields of fire, turning the canyon into a killing zone. The first RPG missed by inches, streaking past the cockpit close enough that Victoria could see the trail of smoke. The second missile struck the tail rotor, sending the helicopter into an uncontrolled spin. Victoria fought the controls with everything she had, trying to auto-rotate the damaged aircraft to a survivable crash landing. But the Black Hawk was dying around her, systems failing, hydraulics bleeding out, the aircraft becoming more like a falling rock than a flying machine. Through her headset, she could hear enemy voices celebrating in a language she didn't recognize but understood perfectly. They thought they'd killed another American pilot. The Black Hawk hit the rocky canyon floor at 80 miles per hour, bounced once, and slammed into a boulder with enough force to crumple the cockpit like an aluminum can. Victoria's last clear memory before unconsciousness was the sound of her passengers screaming and the enemy soldiers cheering from the ridgeline above. She woke up 6 hours later. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of red that matched the blood covering her flight suit. Victoria's left leg was broken. She could see the bone protruding through her flight suit just below the knee. Her right shoulder was dislocated, hanging at an unnatural angle. Blood ran from a gash on her forehead, and every breath sent fire through what were probably broken ribs. But she was alive. The Black Hawk was a twisted wreck around her, smoke still rising from the engine compartment. She could see Lieutenant Parker's body hanging upside down in his harness, neck bent at an impossible angle. Sergeant Rodriguez was pinned under twisted metal, clearly dead. Corporal Williams was nowhere to be visible, probably thrown from the aircraft during the crash. Victoria was alone, badly injured, and deep in enemy territory with no way to call for help. Her radio was destroyed, her emergency beacon was crushed, and her aircraft was never flying again. But she could hear voices. Enemy soldiers were approaching the crash site, probably coming to confirm their kill and search for intelligence. Victoria could hear them laughing, celebrating, talking excitedly about the American helicopter they'd brought down. They were making a mistake. They thought she was dead. With pain that made her vision blur, Victoria managed to extract herself from the wreckage. Her broken leg wouldn't support her weight, so she crawled toward the rear of the aircraft, where she kept her personal gear. Her M9 pistol was still in its holster, along with 2 spare magazines. Her survival knife was clipped to her belt. Most importantly, her medical kit was intact. Victoria quickly administered herself a shot of morphine to dull the pain, then used her knowledge of field medicine to fashion a makeshift splint for her broken leg using aircraft debris and medical tape. It wasn't pretty, but it would allow her to move. The enemy voices were getting closer. Through the gathering darkness, she could see flashlight beams moving down the canyon walls. At least 6 men, probably more, all armed and confident that they were approaching a dead pilot in a dead aircraft. Victoria found a concealed position behind a large boulder about 50 yards from the wreckage and settled in to wait. The morphine was making the pain manageable, but more importantly, it was making her angry. These men had killed her crew, destroyed her aircraft, and celebrated her death. She was going to make them pay for every bullet they'd fired. The first enemy soldier approached the Black Hawk cautiously, his AK-47 ready but his posture relaxed. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of swagger that comes from thinking you've accomplished something significant. He called out to his comrades in their native language, probably reporting that the aircraft was definitely destroyed. Victoria waited until he was 10 feet from her position, then put a 9mm round through his chest. The suppressed pistol made almost no sound, a soft pop that was lost in the evening wind. The soldier dropped without making a noise. 1 down. At least 5 to go. The second enemy soldier came looking for his friend 5 minutes later. Victoria had moved positions, dragging herself 30 yards to a new vantage point despite the pain in her leg. When the second man found his dead comrade, he began calling out in alarm. Victoria's second shot caught him in the head before he could raise his rifle. 2 down. Now the others knew something was wrong. She could hear urgent voices, men calling for their missing comrades, the distinctive sound of weapons being chambered and safeties being clicked off. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. But Victoria had advantages they didn't expect. She knew this canyon. She'd flown over it dozens of times, studying the terrain for exactly this kind of situation. She understood how sound carried between the rock walls, knew where the shadows fell during different times of day, and most importantly, she was fighting for her life while they were just trying to finish a job they thought was already done. The third enemy soldier made the mistake of using his flashlight to search for his missing comrades. Victoria tracked the light source and put a round through the lens, sending glass and metal fragments into the man's face. His scream echoed off the canyon walls as he dropped his weapon and clutched his ruined eyes. Victoria's follow-up shot silenced him permanently. 3 down. The remaining enemy soldiers were now taking the threat seriously. She could hear them calling for reinforcements on their radio, spreading out to search the area systematically, using proper tactical movement instead of the casual confidence they'd shown earlier. But they'd made one critical error. They'd given Victoria time to prepare. Using her survival knife and materials from the Black Hawk wreckage, she'd fashioned several improvised explosive devices using the aircraft's emergency flares and fuel from the damaged tank. They weren't sophisticated, but they didn't need to be. In the narrow canyon, even a small explosion would send deadly shrapnel in all directions. Victoria placed her first IED along the path the enemy soldiers would have to take to reach higher ground. When the fourth soldier stepped on the pressure trigger she'd rigged, the explosion sent aircraft parts and sharp rocks through his legs and torso like a giant shotgun blast. 4 down. The remaining soldiers were now calling frantically on their radio, probably requesting immediate backup and air support. Victoria knew she had limited time before more enemies arrived, but she also knew exactly where the survivors were positioned. The canyon only offered a few routes of approach, and she'd been watching them use their flashlights to signal each other. Victoria dragged herself to a position overlooking the main trail that led out of the canyon. Her leg was on fire despite the morphine, and she was beginning to feel lightheaded from blood loss. But she could see 2 flashlight beams moving together. The last 2 enemy soldiers, trying to escape the canyon before whatever was hunting them, claimed them too. She waited until they were directly below her position, then dropped her second improvised explosive device. The blast illuminated the entire canyon for a split second, revealing 2 human figures being thrown through the air like rag dolls. When the light faded, and the echoes stopped reverberating off the canyon walls, Victoria was alone with the silence and her pain. 6 enemy soldiers, 6 confirmed kills. The entire squad that had celebrated shooting down her Blackhawk was now dead, and she was still alive. Victoria activated her emergency GPS beacon and settled back against a rock to wait for rescue. She'd lost a lot of blood. Her leg was probably going to require surgery, and she'd need weeks of recovery time. But she was alive, and the men who'd killed her crew were not. It took 12 hours for the rescue team to reach her location. When they found Victoria, she was conscious, alert, and sitting beside 6 enemy bodies arranged in a neat row. She'd used the night to collect their weapons, their identification, and most importantly, their radio equipment. "Captain Kane, this is Colonel Matthews," the rescue team leader said as medics began treating her injuries. "What's your status?" Victoria looked at the wreckage of her Black Hawk, then at the bodies of the enemy soldiers. "Sir, mission accomplished. The enemy squad that engaged my aircraft has been neutralized." "Captain, you were shot down 6 hours ago. How did you neutralize 6 enemy combatants with a broken leg and no support?" Victoria's ice-blue eyes met his gaze steadily. "Sir, they made the mistake of thinking I was dead. I corrected their error." The medical evacuation helicopter arrived an hour later. As Victoria was being loaded onto a stretcher, she asked to speak privately with Colonel Matthews. "Sir, I want to return to flight status as soon as my leg heals, but I also want to request a mission." "What kind of mission, Captain?" Victoria looked back at the canyon where her Black Hawk had died and her crew had been killed. "Sir, I want to find whoever sent that squad to this location. I want to find their base of operations, their command structure, and their leadership. And then I want to pay them a visit." Colonel Matthews studied her face. "Captain, what you did here today was extraordinary, but revenge missions aren't—" "It's not revenge, sir," Victoria interrupted. "It's pest control. These people shot down an American aircraft, killed American soldiers, and celebrated our deaths. That kind of behavior needs to be discouraged." 6 weeks later, Captain Victoria Kane returned to flight status. Her leg had healed perfectly, though she walked with a slight limp that reminded her daily of the canyon, where she'd learned that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being the most determined. She'd also received intelligence about the enemy unit that had shot down her Black Hawk. They were part of a larger organization operating out of a compound 30 miles north of the crash site. The same organization that had been responsible for several other helicopter attacks in the region. Victoria volunteered for the mission to eliminate the compound. "Kane, this is a full squadron operation," her new squadron commander told her during the briefing. 4 Black Hawks, 2 Apache gunships, full air support. We're going to level the entire compound." Victoria smiled, the kind of smile that made enemy soldiers wish they'd chosen different careers. "Sir, that sounds perfect, but I want to be the first aircraft over the target. I want them to see me coming." "Any particular reason, Captain?" Victoria thought about Lieutenant Parker, Sergeant Rodriguez, and Corporal Williams. She thought about the enemy soldiers who had celebrated her death. She thought about the sound of her Black Hawk hitting the canyon floor and the long, painful night that had followed. "Sir, I want to deliver a message. I want them to know that shooting down American aircraft has consequences, and I want to be the one who explains those consequences to them." The compound was destroyed in an operation that lasted exactly 18 minutes. Victoria's Black Hawk was indeed the first aircraft over the target, and she personally confirmed that the enemy leadership had been eliminated. The mission was classified as a complete success. The enemy organization was scattered, their leadership eliminated, and their ability to threaten American aircraft was permanently neutralized. But for Victoria Kane, it was something more than a successful mission. It was proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to die when someone expects you to. The woman who'd been shot down and left for dead had become the nightmare that enemy forces told stories about around their campfires. They spoke in whispers about the American pilot who couldn't be killed, who crawled out of burning helicopters and hunted down the men who'd tried to kill her. Victoria never corrected these stories. She understood that fear was a weapon just as effective as missiles or bullets. If enemy soldiers hesitated before firing at American aircraft because they worried about what might crawl out of the wreckage, then her legend was serving a purpose. And in the skies over Afghanistan, Victoria Kane continued to fly her missions with the same ice-blue eyes and platinum blonde hair, carrying the same reputation for appearing exactly when and where the enemy least expected her. But now she also carried something else, the knowledge that she was exactly as dangerous as she'd always believed herself to be, and the confidence that came from having proven it when everything depended on her refusal to quit. The pilot who'd been shot down had become the pilot that no one wanted to shoot down, because everyone knew that Victoria Kane had a habit of surviving things that should have killed her, and an even stronger habit of making sure that the people responsible for trying to kill her didn't get to try again. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.